18 years together. That's what we had. Almost 2 decades of holidays, arguments, grocery lists, sick days, house projects, and quiet Sunday mornings with bad coffee and crossword puzzles. We weren't perfect, but we were steady, or so I thought. That's the thing about time, I guess. It gives you this illusion of permanence. Like the longer someone stays, the more impossible it feels for them to leave. But illusions don't last. And that night shattered all of mine. It started simple. She came home from work later than usual. Nothing too strange. Claimed there was a budget meeting that ran long. She looked tired. Hair pulled back, suit jacket slung over one arm. Kissed me on the cheek without really looking at me and went straight upstairs. I didn't think much of it. I was halfway through reruns on the couch, just trying to unwind after a long day. But then, an hour later, she came back down looking different. Not just changed. Transformed. New dress. Black. Fitted. Definitely not business casual. Heels I hadn't seen in years. That red lipstick she used to wear when we were dating, back when we still went to restaurants that had real tablecloths. Her hair was down, loose around her shoulders, and she smelled like the perfume she used to reserve for anniversaries and weddings. I blinked at her from the couch. She breezed through the living room like I wasn't even there, grabbing her clutch and checking herself in the hallway mirror. "You're heading out again?" I asked, keeping my tone light. She turned halfway toward me, like she just remembered I was in the room. "Yeah, just a quick thing. One of the team leads invited me to a networking dinner." "At 8 o'clock?" I asked. She nodded, slipping on a gold earring. "It's casual. Last minute." She didn't look at me when she said it. I sat up a little. "Who's going?" She shrugged. "Just some people from the regional office. It's not a big deal." That's when I felt it. That tightening in my gut. Not jealousy, not even fear, just that dull, cold knowing. Like your brain registers something long before your heart is ready to admit it. I let it go, at least on the outside. Didn't argue, didn't press, just nodded. "All right, drive safe." She smiled, polite, forced, and turned back to the mirror. Adjusted her necklace like it mattered more than the silence between us. Then she grabbed her keys and left. No kiss. No "I love you." Just the sound of the door closing and her heels clicking down the walkway. I sat there for a full minute, unmoving, my eyes fixed on the empty space where she'd just been. The air still carried her perfume, and for a second, I thought maybe I was imagining things. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe I was reading too much into a late dinner. But something didn't sit right. I got up, walked into the kitchen to pour myself a drink, and that's when I saw it. Her phone, unlocked, face up on the counter. She always took it with her. Always. But not tonight. The screen was still lit from a recent tap. Her calendar app was open. There, in plain text, was an entry. 7:45 p.m. Personal meeting / candlelight grill. Not a work meeting. Not a team dinner. Personal meeting. I stared at it, my heart thudding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. My hand hovered over the screen, tempted to dig deeper. Messages, recent calls, anything to confirm what I already suspected. But I didn't. Not yet. I didn't want to cross that line unless I had to. Still, I needed to know. So I stepped out into the garage and checked her car. More out of instinct than strategy. The driver's door was unlocked. In the passenger seat, half buried under a takeout napkin and an old parking stub, was a printed reservation confirmation. Candlelight Grill. Table for 2. 7:45 p.m. Her name was on it. I stood there for a long time, staring at that little slip of paper. It felt surreal, like finding a crack in a painting I'd always thought was flawless. The kind of moment where your entire reality shifts a few inches to the left and nothing lines up the way it used to. I didn't confront her right away. When she came home hours later, I was still on the couch, trying to decide what version of reality I wanted to believe. She came in quietly, took off her shoes near the door, and walked into the kitchen like nothing was wrong. "How was the dinner?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. She jumped a little, clearly didn't expect me to be awake. "Oh," she said. "It was fine. Long. Just a lot of talking. With the regional team? She nodded, not looking at me as she poured herself a glass of water. Yeah, some of them flew in today. I gave her a moment. Let the silence hang. I saw your calendar, I said. She froze, hand halfway to her mouth with the glass. What? Your phone was open. You had a calendar entry. Said personal meeting, not work. Her expression changed immediately. Not guilt, not even surprise. Just that defensive narrowing of her eyes. Jesus, are you seriously going through my phone now? I didn't go through it. It was just sitting there. She scoffed, setting the glass down hard enough to rattle. This is exactly what I mean. You're always suspicious, always looking for something that isn't there. I stayed quiet, just let her talk. You've been so paranoid lately. It's like you're just waiting for me to mess up. I found a reservation in your car, I said. Candlelight grill. Table for two. She blinked, but only for a second. Then she laughed. Bitter, hollow. You went through my car now, too? God, Mark, do you even hear yourself? I didn't respond. She threw her hands up. This is exhausting. You're exhausting. No wonder I feel like I can't breathe in this house. There it was. The shift. The pivot. Suddenly I was the problem. My questions, my suspicions, they were the issue. Not the late-night reservations. Not the lies. You left for a work dinner with lipstick and heels and a calendar entry that says otherwise. I said calmly. What am I supposed to think? She stared at me, jaw clenched. I'm tired, she muttered. I'm tired of defending myself against your paranoia. If you can't trust me after everything, maybe the problem isn't me. Then she turned and walked upstairs without another word. No apology. No explanation. No denial even. Just blame and silence. And I sat there, in the dim light of our living room, listening to her footsteps fade down the hall. In that moment, I realized something painful. Something I hadn't wanted to admit even to myself. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't stress or a rough patch or any of the excuses I'd been telling myself for the last few months. This was a shift, a breach, a betrayal that had already happened long before I found the proof. She didn't try to explain because there was nothing to explain. She didn't try to deny it because she knew I already knew. She just blamed me because it was easier than facing what she'd done. And I, like a fool, had spent years trusting a version of her that no longer existed. That night, after she disappeared upstairs and left me in the living room drowning in silence, I didn't sleep. I just sat there, letting the cold truth wash over me in waves. My eyes were fixed on the empty hallway, but my mind was somewhere else entirely, rummaging through years of memories like dusty boxes in an attic, things I hadn't touched or questioned in a long time. And now they all started clicking into place. It's strange how your brain works when something breaks. Suddenly, it stops protecting you. All the red flags you brushed off, all the gut feelings you ignored, they come rushing back like they've been waiting for the moment you'd finally be ready to face them. And that moment had come for me. Started small. A year ago, maybe more. She'd beg *N going to the gym more regularly. That wasn't unusual. We were both getting older, both trying to stay healthy, but she'd never been the type to go in the evenings. Especially not late. Suddenly it was, I need to hit the gym after work. Or, they've got a new instructor. It really helps me de-stress. I believed her. Then came the perfume. A new bottle I hadn't seen before. Floral and strong. Not like the soft citrusy one she used to wear. She said a friend gave it to her, that it was just a free sample. But it wasn't. She bought it again when it ran out. I know because I saw the receipt once stuffed in a jacket pocket. At the time, I didn't question it. I was tired, busy, distracted. I wanted to believe we were fine, so I gave her space. That's what people in long-term relationships do, right? They trust. They don't suffocate. But space, it turns out, can be a double-edged sword. She started locking her phone. That's what really stung, even more than the perfume or the gym. We'd always been open about that kind of thing. Not in a we snoop through each other's messages way, but in a we have nothing to hide way. Suddenly, there was a password. No explanation. Just there one day like it had always been there. I asked about it once, casually, and she brushed it off. Work made me update my security settings. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to, so I let it go. But I noticed things. Late-night texts that made her smile, only to quickly flip the phone face down when I entered the room. Dinners eaten in silence. Conversations that used to stretch into the night slowly shrunk to the bare minimum. She used to ask about my day. Now it was like pulling teeth to get more than a "that's nice" from her. At first, I thought maybe it was just stress. Work had been hard on both of us, and I told myself she was tired. That maybe we were both just coasting, waiting for things to level out. But looking back now, I realize I was the only one waiting. She had already checked out. The worst part wasn't even the distance. It was the way she reacted whenever I tried to get close again. If I asked where she was going, she'd bristle. If I suggested spending the weekend together, she'd make up excuses. She had errands. She needed alone time. She had to catch up on reading or wanted to go see her sister, who later told me she hadn't visited in months. And every time I brought it up, every time I said I felt disconnected or concerned, she'd flip it. You're too sensitive. You always assume the worst. You never trust me anymore. And like an idiot, I believed her. I believed that maybe I was the problem. I remember one night, I think it was 6 months ago, we were supposed to go to this outdoor jazz festival. We used to love things like that. Live music, warm nights, food trucks, and people dancing barefoot in the grass. It was our thing. That day, she came home and said she wasn't feeling well. Headache, long day, wanted to rest. I told her no problem, ordered takeout, and spent the evening watching a documentary alone. The next morning, I woke up early to grab groceries, and on my way back, I saw her car pulling into the driveway from the opposite direction of the grocery store, gym, or anywhere she normally went. She looked surprised to see me, said she'd gone out to get coffee. But there was no coffee in the car. No cup, no receipt, nothing. At the time, it felt odd. But I pushed it down, just like I pushed down every strange moment before and after that. She started coming home later and later. At first, it was work deadlines. Then it was, I just need a little time to myself before coming home. Then it was just unexplained. Hours gone. No texts. No calls. Just an apology afterward, and even that started to fade. I didn't realize it then, but I had started shrinking myself just to avoid rocking the boat. I stopped asking questions. I stopped sharing things about my day. I just shut down. And the thing is, I don't think she noticed. Or maybe she did and didn't care. It's a slow death, that kind of silence. You don't even realize you're drowning until you look up and see how far you've sunk. I kept waiting for her to reach out, to notice, to say something like, "Hey, you seem off lately," or, "I miss how we used to talk." But she never did. Because the truth is, she'd already found someone else to talk to. The puzzle pieces were everywhere, and they'd been there for months, maybe longer. Her sudden interest in weekend work conferences, none of which I could verify. Her new gym bag, always packed and ready, even though she hardly broke a sweat when she came home. The hotel rewards program she signed up for, claiming it was for our next trip, even though we hadn't planned a trip in over a year. And then there was the way she looked at me or didn't look at me. You can tell when someone stops seeing you. Not in the literal sense. They still say hi, still pass you the salt at dinner. But they don't see you. You become part of the furniture. Background noise. Presence, but not a person. And once that shift happens, it's almost impossible to come back from. I remember the last time she touched me, really touched me, like she wanted to. It was our anniversary. A year ago now. She wore that blue dress I always loved. We went to dinner at a nice place downtown, drank too much wine, and she laughed at one of my dumb jokes like she used to. We danced in the living room when we got home, slow and a little clumsy. Just us and the glow of the kitchen light. For a second, it felt real again. I thought maybe we were getting back on track. But now I realize that was a performance. A pause in the exit strategy she was already crafting. Maybe even a guilt-driven attempt to hold onto something while letting go of it behind my back. That memory, once a bright spot, now feels tainted. like a fake smile in an old photo, pretty but hollow. As the night dragged on, I found myself going through old photos on my phone. Trips we'd taken, dinners we'd cooked, birthdays, hikes, lazy Sundays on the couch, the little, quiet life we'd built together. And in every picture, there was this version of her I used to know. She had this light in her, something unfiltered, present, and somewhere along the way that light dimmed, and I hadn't even noticed when. That was what broke me the most. Not the cheating, not the lies, but the realization that I hadn't seen her fade, that I let it happen right in front of me. By the time the sun started to rise, the living room was bathed in this pale, gray light, the kind that makes everything feel colder than it is. I sat there, phone in hand, heart hollowed out, and I knew there was no going back to sleep. Not tonight, not in this house, not in this life, because once all the puzzle pieces line up, you don't unsee the picture they form. You just have to decide what you're going to do about it. By the time the house finally went quiet, it felt wrong to be in it. Every sound echoed louder than it should have, the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking clock, the faint creak of wood as the house settled. I kept expecting her to come downstairs, to say something, anything. She didn't. Around midnight, I found myself standing in the doorway of her home office. I hadn't planned to go in there. My feet just carried me. The door was half open, the desk lamp still on, casting a pale circle of light across her laptop. It was open, logged in, waiting. I stood there for a long time arguing with myself. This wasn't who I was. I believed in privacy, trust, lines you didn't cross. But trust had already been crossed. Not by me. I sat down and touched the trackpad. Her email was open. Reminder notifications stacked along the side. Travel confirmations. Hotel receipts. At first, I told myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. Conferences, work trips, something I'd missed. But then I saw his name. Nathan. Not once or twice. Over and over. Thread after thread spanning months. The subject lines weren't careful. They weren't vague. They were familiar. Int asterisk mate. Planned. I opened one. I can't stop thinking about last night. Denver was worth it just for that. My chest tightened. Another message followed. Same place next time. I'll book the room again. 2 nights this time. I scrolled. Flights. Hotels. Schedules that overlapped perfectly with her work trips. Photos attached, nothing graphic, but enough. A mirror selfie in a hotel room I'd never seen. Her smile was different there. Lighter. Younger. Like she was someone else entirely. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I felt empty. Like something inside me had finally shut off to protect what was left. They talked about me. Not cruelly. Worse than that. Casually. As if I were already a solved problem. He's been distant lately, she wrote. He won't suspect. Remind me to clear my calendar, she joked. Nathan replied, eventually you'll have to choose. But take your time. I'm not going anywhere. And she answered, I know. That was it. Not confusion. Not a mistake. Not loneliness. This was planning. This was intention. This was a second life built carefully alongside the first. I closed the laptop and sat back, staring at the wall. 18 years collapsed into a series of timestamps and booking numbers. Every doubt I'd defended her against evaporated in seconds. This wasn't emotional overlap. This wasn't a lapse. This was commitment to someone else. I stood up slowly and walked into the bedroom. She was asleep, turned away from my side of the bed. I looked at her like a stranger. There was no urge to wake her. No need to confront. Nothing she could say mattered anymore. The truth had already spoken. I went back downstairs and sat at the kitchen table until morning. When the sun came up, I felt strangely calm, clear, like the last piece had finally locked into place. Some people need closure. I needed distance. Because once doubt becomes certainty, the only question left is how long you're willing to stay somewhere you no longer exist. And I already knew the answer. When you realize the life you're living isn't yours anymore, it doesn't explode, it empties. Quietly, methodically. That's how it felt that morning as I packed a bag in silence. The sounds of drawers opening and zippers pulling echoing through the house like punctuation marks in a goodbye I wasn't going to say out loud. She was still asleep upstairs. Or pretending to be. I didn't care. I wasn't angry. I'd already moved past that. Anger had its chance. What came next was something colder, sharper. Resolve. I wasn't going to yell, throw things, or demand answers. I already had the answers. Every lie, every password, every thread of evidence laid out in her inbox like a confession typed in slow motion. I pulled the duffel bag from the back of the closet, one I hadn't used since a fishing trip 3 years ago, and filled it with essentials. A few changes of clothes, my passport, birth certificate, the backup credit card she didn't know about, a flash drive with copies of our financials. The kind of things you gather when you're not just leaving the house, you're leaving the story you've been written into. I took the cash we kept in the emergency envelope behind the dryer. It wasn't much, but enough to get me out of the city without using traceable cards. Enough to remind me I wasn't trapped. I left the wedding ring on the bathroom sink. Not dramatic, just placed, where she'd see it, where she'd understand that I didn't want to carry symbols of a life that wasn't real anymore. I didn't leave a note. What was the point? She had written her side of the story already, in hotel receipts, text threads, and the careful deletion of everything she didn't want me to see. A note would only become ammunition for her version of events. I wasn't giving her that. I powered down my main phone and slid it into a drawer. I had a backup phone, cheap and prepaid, for emergencies. I logged out of everything: email, cloud backups, apps. I changed passwords she might still remember. Erased location tracking. I wasn't running away. I was stepping out of reach. By 9 a.m. I was on the road, driving west with no music, no GPS, just an old paper map I found in the glove box. I crossed the state line before noon, booked a room at a roadside motel using a fake last name, and sat on the edge of the bed staring at the unfamiliar wallpaper like it had answers I didn't yet understand. I didn't feel free. Not yet. But I felt unhooked. In that small, stale room with flickering fluorescent lights and the smell of too many lives lived before mine, I did something I hadn't done in years. I breathed. Not the kind of breath you take when you're hurrying out the door or arguing over dinner plans. A real breath. One that fills your lungs and hits the bottom of your ribs like it's clearing space for something new. I lay back on the thin mattress, fully dressed, and stared at the ceiling. I wasn't thinking about what she was doing or who she might be messaging. That part of the story was no longer mine. What filled my head were all the things I'd stopped doing. The calls I didn't return. The hobbies I'd shelved. The quiet ways I let myself vanish while trying to keep us whole. I used to paint. Did I even remember how? I used to call my brother once a week. When was the last time I even heard his voice? I used to love waking up early on weekends and walking to the bakery downtown. I used to feel things fully, not in fragments. But somewhere along the way I stopped, because I thought that's what it meant to grow up. To sacrifice, to compromise, to hold the line even when the other person wasn't holding it with you. Now I knew better. Leaving didn't feel like quitting. It felt like waking up inside a house that had burned down while I was still trying to fix the plumbing. Back home, she would be waking up to absence. Maybe checking her phone. Maybe calling me. Maybe crafting the first lines of the story she'd tell her friends, her coworkers, maybe even Nathan. I didn't care. Not anymore. She might say I left without warning. That I was unstable, cold. That I gave up too easily after a tough year. Maybe she'd cry when she said it. She was always good at that, looking broken just enough to be believable. But none of that mattered now. I wasn't her villain. I wasn't her safety net. I wasn't hers anymore. For so long, I stayed because I thought that's what love required. Endurance, forgiveness, patience. But now I understood. Love shouldn't feel like swallowing your own voice just to keep someone else comfortable. In the motel room, I found a notepad next to the Bible in the drawer. I wrote down one line at the top of the page. You don't have to stay where you're no longer seen. That line stayed with me. I wasn't leaving because I was bitter. I was leaving because I refused to keep being invisible in a life I helped build. I didn't know where I was going next. Not really. But for the first time in a long time, that didn't scare me. It felt like the only honest step left. It didn't take long for the story to change. I thought I had walked away clean. No confrontation, no screaming match, no long-winded explanation. I didn't expect closure, but I had hoped for silence. A quiet ending. Something honest or at least neutral. But people like her don't leave space for silence. They fill it. I got my first hint 2 weeks after I left. I'd been staying at a cheap short-term rental just outside a sleepy town where nobody knew me. I worked remotely, kept my head down, cooked my meals on a hot plate, and tried to remember who I was before all this. One afternoon, my backup phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. "Hi. I hope this isn't weird. My name is Claire. I think we need to talk." I ignored it at first. Scams were everywhere, and I wasn't in the mood to entertain strangers. But 5 minutes later, a second message came through. "I'm Nathan's wife." That got my attention. I stared at the screen, heart pounding with that sick, hot pulse of dread. I hadn't said anything to him, hadn't reached out, hadn't contacted her either. I thought I was done with both of them. I replied, "Go on." Her next message came quickly. "I found your name in his emails. I'm sorry to reach out like this. I just needed to know I'm not crazy." It was like reading a message from a different version of myself. A version from 3 months ago, holding on to instincts, unsure if they meant anything. She sent **TS. Calendar entries, emails, and messages between Nathan and my wife, where they talked about their weekends away. The excuses they were feeding us, the jokes they made about our suspicions. I read through them in silence. She was sending them as confirmation, but I didn't need confirmation. I had already seen it for myself. What shook me wasn't the content. It was the context. She had told Nathan I was on the verge of a breakdown, that I'd been distant for a long time, that I barely spoke anymore, and was obsessed with tracking her movements. She made it sound like I was unraveling, like I'd abandoned her emotionally, and she was just doing what she needed to survive. It wasn't just cheating. It was rewriting the entire narrative of our marriage. I wasn't the betrayed husband anymore. I was her alibi. Nathan's wife, Claire, was angry, but not toward me. She'd been lied to just as thoroughly, fed the same lines in a different voice. "She told him you two were basically separated," she wrote, "that you were sleeping in different rooms, that she didn't even know how to talk to you anymore. She was good. I'll give her that. The worst part? Some of it was true, just not in the way she framed it. We had drifted. We had stopped talking. But that wasn't the cause of her affair. It was the result of it." I didn't write back right away. I stared at her messages for a long time, wondering what I was supposed to feel. Rage? Vindication? Relief that I wasn't alone? What I felt mostly was exhaustion, a kind of moral fatigue, like I was being forced to defend myself against a version of events that had never been real, sculpted by someone who once claimed to love me. Eventually, I wrote back, "Thank you for telling me. You didn't deserve this. Neither of us did." She didn't reply. Not then. Maybe she didn't need to. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan, listening to the slow rhythm of the blades cutting through stale air. And I realized something that made me sit up, breath caught in my chest. She hadn't just lied to cover up what she was doing. She had positioned me as the reason for it. I was the excuse, the fallback, the scapegoat she could point to and say, "Look what I had to deal with. Look how alone I felt." She needed to be the victim in her version of the story. And to do that, she had to make me the villain. That's when it clicked. The strange looks I'd gotten from her friends in the months before I left. The vague comments from her sister. The subtle shift in how people responded to me on social media, in texts when I reached out. She had started laying the groundwork long before she ever admitted what was happening. Quietly, carefully, planting the idea that I was unstable, that I was cold, that she was trying to hold our marriage together while I was checked out, that I didn't understand her anymore. First, I felt angry, but underneath that was something deeper, grief. Not just over the marriage, but over the way I had been erased from my own story. Rewritten without consent. Made to look like the one who let go first, when all I ever did was hold on too long. I remember sitting in that tiny rented kitchen, eating toast over the sink, and thinking, she didn't just betray me, she buried me. She took 18 years of shared history and rewrote it into a tragedy where she was the hero, and I was the emotional ghost haunting the walls. It was a strategic kind of cruelty, one that didn't scream but whispered, and the worst part was knowing people would believe her, because people love a clean story. A story where the woman was lonely, and the man was distant, where she tried and finally snapped under the weight of neglect. It's an easier pill to swallow than the truth, that sometimes good people get cheated on for no reason other than proximity and convenience. Later that week, I got a call from an old friend of mine, Jake. We'd drifted over the years, but he still checked in from time to time. He sounded hesitant, almost nervous. "Hey," he said, "I don't want to stir anything up, but I ran into Marla. She mentioned you'd been having a hard time, that you left kind of suddenly." Marla was one of her coworkers, someone we used to go on double dates with. I hadn't spoken to her since before I left. I asked Jake what exactly she said. He hesitated. Just that you'd been dealing with mental health stuff, that you were overwhelmed, that things at home were hard and you sort of cracked under the pressure. I almost laughed. She said I cracked? That's the word she used. That word rang in my head like a fire alarm. It wasn't just a mischaracterization, it was a strategy. A way to invalidate anything I might say later. If she could convince the people around us that I was unstable, then the emails, the trips, the lies, they wouldn't matter, because I'd be too emotional to trust. I told Jake the truth. I didn't send *TS. I didn't rant. I didn't try to burn her to the ground. I just said, she was having an affair. I found out. I left. That's the whole story. He didn't respond for a second. Then he said, "Damn, I had no idea. You weren't supposed to." We talked for a while after that. Felt good. Strange, but good. Like reclaiming something I didn't even realize I'd lost. The right to tell my own truth. That conversation gave me a new kind of clarity. She could say whatever she wanted. To her friends, to Nathan, to whoever was still listening. But I didn't have to correct the record for them. I just had to live in a way that made the truth undeniable. People believe actions, not performances, not rewrites. And me? I wasn't going to disappear just because she needed me to be the exit ramp in her story. No, I was going to be the part she didn't expect. The chapter where I stopped letting her control the narrative. Where I told the truth without apology. Where I stopped surviving her choices and started choosing myself. That's when I decided I wasn't hiding anymore. I wasn't broken. I wasn't the villain. I was the one who walked away because I finally understood I deserved to. When I came back to the city, it wasn't to see her. It was to see a lawyer. I walked into the office with a folder of evidence and a decision already made. No drama. No threats. Just truth. When the lawyer asked if I wanted to file with cause, I didn't flinch. I said the word out loud for the first time. Infidelity. That one word made everything real. This wasn't about revenge. It was about control. About reclaiming my voice after being erased from the story she'd rewritten. She could keep spinning her version. I had facts and now I had action. Months later, I saw a photo of her online. Arms around Nathan, smiling like nothing had happened. But all I felt was clarity. I wasn't in that picture, not even in the shadow of it. By then, I'd moved on. A smaller city. A simpler life. Morning coffee with someone who never made me feel invisible. I didn't disappear. I walked out of a life where I no longer belonged. That wasn't weakness. That was the beginning of everything new.